You guys hear me okay? There we go. We have a lot to talk about today, so we're going to get started right on time. My name is Chad Holmes. I lead up the mobile solution architects at Red Hat. Real quick to make sure everyone's working this morning, who has heard of EA before? Show of hands. Okay, good. Who has heard of Red Hat Mobile before? Okay, that's more than normal. And who's heard of Aperion before? I'm sorry. Yeah. Oh, okay. So the point of bringing it up, EA is obviously a great forward-thinking technology company. Bill is going to talk a little bit today about what they're doing in the mobile space for the EA I.T. division. Talk about how Red Hat Mobile plays into that, how Aperion plays into it, and how you guys can kind of learn from their experience on what you should look for going forward. So by way of introduction, Bill Bendrot runs. Sorry, you have a very long title. So. Manager for mobile stuff at EA, and I'm not doing that justice. Caleb is
VP of Operations.
There you go, thank you. I'm Chad Holmes, as I said. We have the whole EA team down front here. We have a couple Red Hatters as well. As you guys have questions, once we start getting blank faces about the technical stuff, we have a whole panel of experts down here. So ask those kind of towards the end. With that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. So, as Chad said, just quick introductions. You've heard who we are. I just want to introduce my team real quick. So Ryan Chia is my principal solutions architect. Paul Karstens is my principal services architect. And Tai Nguyen is my principal applications and mobile architect. And I spelled his name right finally. So Elliot Dunn is our salesperson extraordinaire. So what we're going to cover today is our experience in EA I.T. of creating a successful mobile program, enterprise mobile program, over the last 12 months. So, show of hands in here, who is more on the architecture and development side? Okay, good. That's actually good, because this is more of a program level talk. Who is more CIO or CTO, things like that, or basically looking to start and manage a mobile program at their company? Okay. Who has at your company a running mobile program? Okay. And who is thinking about it or in the process right now? And I'm hoping a whole bunch of hands go up on this one. Okay. Whatever. So.
You're in the right room then.
Okay. So as Chad said, I think everybody here is familiar with EA. We go back till 1982, one of the world's first and largest video game publishers. Willing to bet that just about everybody in here at some point in their life has played one or more of our games. So here you see on the left side a lot of HD and PC titles. And then on the right side, a very big growing area, not only for us, but the whole industry, which is mobile. So we specifically work within EA I.T. inside of a group called Employee Tools and Technology. This group was founded pretty recently at the end of 2014. We are responsible for any systems or services or applications that essentially touch every area of the company and basically enable our workforce. So there are areas like communication and collaboration, but services and mobile is specifically my team. And this is actually a fairly new thing for EA I.T., as I'll talk a little bit about. I do want to step back, though, and talk about sort of where I began at EA about 5 years ago. Specifically, I was the principal architect in a group called Worldwide Customer Experience. Prior to that, EA had a CS organization, and EA probably had a little bit of a reputation of not having particularly great customer support. And when CE formed, obviously, you look at what came before, and if you had to sort of narrow it down to what the issue was, it was just an area that was perennially underfunded, underinvested in, and I think CS had something like 16 full-time employees worldwide. CE has grown pretty quickly into being about 500 or 600 worldwide. Okay, so EA made a conscious decision about 5 years ago to invest in the customer experience. And then some of you might remember a couple years ago, there were 2 years running that EA got a couple fairly unflattering awards as far as not being a very great consumer company. Our new CEO in 2013, Andrew Wilson, took that as basically as a call to action, as a as an opportunity. And so he came out with this, this mantra of player first, which on its surface sounds like kind of a squishy, touchy-feely corporate slogan thing, but he really means it, and it really permeated every area of the company. And player first was all about listening to your customers and making sure that your products, the stuff that you come out with, work consistently, cohesively, as frictionless as possible. And you are basically putting yourself in the place of your customer with the products that you're creating. So if you're in the studios, then it's pretty clear how what you do impacts the players. But us in IT, how is what we do impacting the players? It brings up a bigger question, and that question is, why, and this is not just strictly an EA I.T. thing, why does IT historically ignore employee experience? Okay? I think there's a historical precedent for this, which is those of us that are follically challenged or gray enough to remember the early days of the web or the days before the web, whatever products or applications that IT would come up with, that's what the employees used. There was no other place to go. That's what they had to do. They had no choice. And I think as a result of that, IT has gotten into the mindset of when we produce solutions, we do it from our point of view, not the user's point of view. And how many people in here watch Silicon Valley? The most hands yet, so awesome. So truth and fiction are not terribly far away from one another. So while this is fictitious, I'm willing to bet just about everybody in here has seen an internal IT application that is not too far off this mark. Okay, this is fairly user hostile. So what does all this have to do with mobile? Okay, well, something has happened in the last 5-10 years, which is the consumerification of IT. Okay, it kind of started going back to for mobile access. IT departments handed out BlackBerries, so it was completely controlled by IT, governed by IT, and then the iPhone came along, and you started having a lot of people saying, "Why can't I use this at work?" Okay, so that was really the beginning of consumer products actually driving everything. But now we also have things like file sharing, collaboration, where there are excellent tools out in the consumer space that are starting to make massive inroads into IT. And we all hear about these scary stories of shadow IT and everything else, but there's another way to look at this, which is as an opportunity. Okay, because the opportunity is that we know where the bar is. Okay, and if you can't meet or exceed that bar, they're probably not going to use the solution that you guys spend a lot of time and effort developing. Okay, so I moved into this position a little more than a year and a half ago. And one of the things that I was told was, go create a mobile program, because despite us being one of the world's largest mobile game producers, we actually did not have an internal mobile IT story. It had been attempted a couple times, and I'll talk a bit about that. But shortly after moving over to this position, I was at a security conference. And there was a guy by the name of Tyler Shields, who was from Forrester, that was giving a talk on that usability and security did not need to be mutually exclusive, but you had to put yourself in the position of your users. So he talked about something in particular called the mobile moment. So, and I'm quoting him, the expectation that I can get what I want in my immediate context and moment of need, or put more simply, a point in time and space when someone pulls out a mobile device to get what he or she wants. Seems pretty straightforward. I can give you a very brief, concrete example of my own. I travel a lot for my job. So there was a point last year where I'm pretty sure over 4 weeks I was in 4 different, wildly different time zones. And I think being in SFO, went up to get my rental car and I hadn't booked one. I spaced and there wasn't one. So they asked me, do you have your corporate number? No, I have no idea what that number is. Well, then we have to charge you full price for the car. There's no way I'm going to get that expensed. So I said, all right. So I duck out of line, and I bring up the Concur app, okay, which I use all the time for looking at my trips, but I've never done anything actively with it. Went into my trip, pulled up rental car, selected one from Enterprise, did it, took about 90 seconds. Went back up, told the guy, all set, do you have your corporate number? No, it should be in your system now, and it was. I had never done that before on the Concur app. I didn't have to figure it out. It was intuitive, and it saved me in the moment that I needed it. That is good mobile experience design. That's exactly what you want. So for building a mobile program, why am I talking so much about experience? It's because experience is the focus for everything that you do in mobile, okay? It's not just the UI. The UI is the most front and center and obvious thing about experience, but when you design services or data, how efficient they are, how quick they are, how reliable they are, how they recover from failures or lag or anything else, that affects the user experience. Your QA, if your applications and services are difficult to test and automate, more bugs get through, more defects get through, that affects the user experience. Your DevOps, your ability to package and deploy efficiently. If your application or services are built in such a way that anytime you make a fix, it's going to require everybody to download a new install, that's a bad user experience. If you can fix it transparently at the services level to where one moment it's not behaving correctly and then they try it again 2 minutes later and magically it's working, that affects user experience. So the consumerification and user experience are nowhere more vital in any type of application than they are in mobile because your users have other options. They can either go to other mobile apps, or in a lot of cases, they will just say, I'll just wait till I'm back at my desk and then not use it. And then what did you spend all this time and effort for? So, like I mentioned, about a year and a half ago, I was told to start a mobile program. And it was not the first time that enterprise mobile was attempted at EA. It actually had been attempted a couple times. And so the first thing was figuring out, why did it never come to fruition? What happened? But before we talk about that, I want to stress something. When you start talking about a program, one of the most important things is, yes, you have to have solid applications and things like that, and we're going to talk about that, but you need to have a plan. And you would be surprised, or I don't know, maybe you wouldn't be surprised from personal experience, how often this does not get considered. You have to think about what your plan is going to be 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months from now. And yes, that is difficult to do with changing business requirements and tech that is evolving incredibly rapidly. But you still need to make a best effort in that. And there are techniques that you can use that will allow you to in a nimble fashion, adapt to those new technologies and requirements. But you also have to think about all these things down here of how do you do your deployments, how do you manage them, QA, analytics is actually a great one. Are you capturing analytics? And then once you have the analytics, what do you do with them? Okay, capturing the analytics alone isn't going to help you unless you know how to make them actionable. So when I looked at sort of the most recent example of EA trying to do enterprise IT, when we did a postmortem on the whole thing, it was a failure not for lack of engineering. The engineering was actually quite good, okay? But the team was not supported in a mid to long-term vision whatsoever. This came down to the infrastructure, this came down to the testing and process, but also the apps that were built, while it was solid engineering that was done, the use cases were not terribly compelling. Okay? There was one application that was little more than a content mirror of an intranet site. So one of the other takeaways from this is content alone on a mobile application, unless you're something like Flipboard, is useless. There has to be function. There has to be a reason someone is going to use it. Otherwise, I will wait till I get back to my desk and do it at my desktop. And you've wasted your time. Also, if it's just a content mirror, why do I need a mobile application? I just do a responsive website and call it a day. We're done. Okay, so you have to think about that. The other two applications were an expense reporting app and an approvals app. Unless your expense reporting and your approvals are so incredibly specific and unique, you can buy stuff like that. So is that really the best use of engineering time to build something that you can buy pretty easily? It wasn't all bad news, though. So we sort of did a postmortem on the entire thing, and there was a lot of really good things in here too. The first one was the development process and approach that they took was actually hybrid. So how many people in here know what hybrid mobile is? Okay, so some of you. Hybrid mobile is using effectively web technologies to build a local running web application that you package as a native application. So the framework they were using, however, was something called Sencha Touch. Sencha, I think when it was first introduced 5-6 years ago, was pretty revolutionary at the time. I personally don't think Sencha has aged very well. So when we really took a look at it, and there was a lot of kludginess with the tooling, the way that code was structured actually reminded me a lot of, and I'm dating myself this way, but a lot of way back of the early days of Java servlets, where you didn't have JSPs yet, so you would have HTML mixed in with your actual Java code, and it's not a pretty way to do development. So we decided not to stay with Sencha. So we looked around at Xamarin and a number of other things, and we came across Ionic. Ionic is actually a mobile framework that sits on top of Angular. So it is very lightweight. It is also one of the fastest growing hybrid framework projects. So it seemed to have momentum, and it was a very good fit. So we decided to go with that. Apache Cordova was another piece of hybrid. Cordova is an open source plugin framework that essentially bridges the gap between your hybrid application and native OS and device level functions. Okay, so it is really what turns your locally running web application into a true iOS or Android, application. So keep Cordova. Application build, this was kind of a mess because it was manual. And what the final sort of stage was done through something called Adobe PhoneGap, which is actually Adobe's packaged version of Cordova. PhoneGap is like a $10 a month service. You get what you pay for. It's very no frills, and I think it's fine for developers. It's not fine, in my opinion, for production level work. App distribution. This was a particularly ugly situation. We didn't really have one. The previous team was using PhoneGap for distribution, which is you have a QR code or an HTTP link. Anybody that has that link or that code can get the app. There's no governance, there's no control, there's no security. It's not a great way to do it. For distributing to a dev team, sure. To your enterprise, no. Other teams within EA were actually doing things like S3. Some of them were doing Hockey app. There was no central way to actually govern this, so this was a huge problem that we had. App and service testing, again, all manual, a lot of troubles there. Services, there was a good news, bad news situation. Good news was they had built all their services with Node.js. Okay, I come from about 17, 18 years of Java background. So Node was fairly new to me, and also I kind of had a bias on JavaScript that I'll talk about in a second. So when I did a little bit of digging into Node, I was really pleasantly surprised at what it was capable of, the amount of momentum behind it, and we'll talk about that in a second. So we're going to keep Node. But the bad news is when we took stock of the infrastructure, I said, great, show me what do you guys have for production servers. I should leave the S off of that word. It's production server, one, in a data center somewhere. So I don't think I need to explain to anybody what the shortcomings of having a single production server are on scalability or reliability. So that was a major problem. And while there was a test instance, there was not a development instance. So basically what that meant is they were developing services locally on their machines, doing that, and then moving it up to a networked instance, and then moving it over to production. And then upon further inspection, we realized that because these were two servers that they had provisioned, set up everything themselves, the test instance was actually more updated than the production instance. Real bad. Okay, so a lot of alarm bells going off. So all of this had to be addressed, and then just from some personal experience of not wanting to have to manage servers or VMs, I knew what we wanted to get away with this because we have a fair amount of experience with PaaS and SaaS, and I was going to say ass applications, but forget that I said that. So anyway, moving on. What did we need? So scalable infrastructure, Node.js, microservices, and I'll talk about that in a second and why. Automation throughout the entire process, and all of this has to be done securely. From the code that we develop to the infrastructure that we're using to the way that we deploy the applications, it has to be secure. Okay. What's so great about Node.js? How many people here are actually familiar with Node? Good. That's actually very good. So I'm a little snarky on this first one. What's so great about it? It's JavaScript, duh. Why is that great? Well, remember that I talked about that our application approach is going to be hybrid. That's JavaScript. So by having our services be JavaScript, by having our front end be Ionic and Angular, we actually have JavaScript throughout our entire platform. So that helps with the technical debt and spin up that the team has to do. So it aligns with our skill sets pretty well. Also, as I say up here, JavaScript's no longer a toy, and this is my little snarky thing, and you laughed at this. What do I mean by that? I know JavaScript has done tremendous things in the web application space over the last almost 20 years. I know this. But it never sort of progressed beyond being able to do like middle tier work or back end work or things like that. And also a lot of the tooling and everything that was around it was kind of kludgy. And I think a lot of it had to do with the JavaScript and web, especially web front-end technology, advances so quickly that it never reaches a point of being able to sort of stabilize. And I'm not going to say that that's fine for application work, but it's been the way that it's been. So, you know, it is what it is. However, on services and middle-tier work, that can't be how this is. It's got to be a lot more structured and solid than that and a lot more predictable. So Node made a huge change into this. It has a huge amount of momentum. You know, we're approaching 300,000 NPM plugins for Node. Okay, and that's only in like the last 5 years. So Node, I think, has very quickly crossed that threshold of it's not a fad. It'll be around. Okay, and I'm sure there will be other things that come up, but Node's not going anywhere, and it's continuing to evolve in fantastic ways. The biggest one that we have seen is the point at the bottom about ECMA 6 and TypeScript. So how many people are familiar with TypeScript? Okay. If any of you have a background in Java or .NET or things like that, TypeScript will allow you to adapt to Node in a very, very reasonable fashion, okay, because it will become very familiar. You don't have to deal with a lot of the weird peculiarities of plain JavaScript, but you also start getting things like inheritance and classes and things like that. So TypeScript is, I think, one of the most transformative aspects of what's going on with Node right now. Microservices I mentioned. So again, I feel like we're going to do a wave in here, but how many people are familiar with microservices? Good, that's what I like to say. So why are microservices a big deal? So I've been in the SOA space for 15 years or so. I used to be a principal over at BEA eons ago. And if you really think about it, all of the service structure and methodology that goes with SOA was always fantastic, but the Achilles heel of SOA up until now has been packaging and runtime. Because you can make very diverse and powerful service catalogs, but if you're packaging them as a single unit to go out under a single runtime and they're being called intra-VM, you're actually not loosely coupled. On paper you are, but in practice you aren't, which makes it really, really difficult for you to actually gain reuse of the services that you have, because that means if I have to fix this service, I wind up affecting all these other ones that aren't even related. Microservices allow you to actually have independence of all this. All of your services are your code, your environment variables, and your runtime. That's actually your deployment artifact. And now with serverless architecture like in Feed Henry, as we'll talk about, as in OpenShift, as in AWS and Azure, you are now at a point that you actually can have complete, full, loosely coupled independence between your services. So this winds up saving you a ton of time and money to do this. So I mentioned our applications weren't that compelling. So this was a big worry. We very fortunately, about spring of last year, had a couple use cases drop into our lap that were compelling. One was a game test feedback application, which basically allows us internally to gather feedback on pre-release mobile games and provide that back to the development team so that in the end, the games are better, less buggy, more fun to play, more engaging. So this is, I mentioned before, the question of, for the player-first initiative, how can EA I.T. affect that? Here's one way that we affect that. Another one was, I mentioned the intranet application that wasn't terribly compelling because it was a content mirror. Well, we had the idea of what if we could actually turn that into the corporate app store? So it's not just content, but it had function as well, and a reason that everyone would go to use it. So we needed all these things, but how did I know how to connect these dots? So stepping back a few months from that to February or so of 2015, a bunch of colleagues and I were taking a trip up to Westford in Massachusetts to see Red Hat, just to get an update on Fuse and OpenShift and things like that. And while we were there, I think we were there for a day or two, they said, hey, we know that you're also starting to build a mobile program. We have a mobile product now. And for some reason, I thought it was like a front-end thing. And I was like, yeah. And they said, well, they can come down and just spend a half hour and kind of show you what they got. Sure. And that's where Chad and I met.
Sure. And that's where we had one of our more interesting first meetings that I've ever been involved in. On a personal note, it's one of those meetings where you realize you should always dress up when you go in the office. If you're wearing ripped-up jeans and a T-shirt, probably not the best first meeting.
However, talking to a video game company. So
yeah, so it worked out okay that time. So we walked in and we started to do the typical demo, show our technology, and it became really apparent really quickly that we were dealing with a group that was significantly more mature in the mobile space than we'd seen before, right? The tech stuff was going to prove itself out over time, but to Bill's point 4 or 5 slides ago, they tried this already, and they realized it's not just about the technology. It's not just about the engineers. It's how do you make them successful? How do you put a plan in place long term? So we had a great discussion, right? For the folks in the audience today, that slide 3 or 4 slides ago is what you really want to focus on when you're standing up your program. How do we build a successful program in terms of not just engineering, that'll work itself through, but vision, planning, management, all that stuff. So we had a great discussion, demoed the technology, kicked off a bunch of activities, but it was clear, that foresight is what really drove success for you guys.
And we sort of went down, and it was sort of just a laundry list of things that just fortunately seemed to be clicking in. So they were Node.js services. Awesome. They were cloud-based, so we didn't have to worry about provisioning VMs or server boxes or anything else. Awesome. We even had a totally unexpected one, which was, I mentioned that we did not have a great build story. They have a mobile build farm within Feed Henry. Okay, and by the way, it's called Red Hat Mobile Application Platform. I still call it
brand
Feed Henry.
police are on their way.
It's what we're calling it. So
for the record, we also have more than one server running on the back end.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
You could argue it's 0 servers, but yeah.
Yeah. So it was a lot of things clicking together. Like, okay, this actually could jumpstart what we need very, very quickly. And I asked you the question of, let's say we sign with you tomorrow. How long would it take for us to have a running implementation? You said days. A couple days, you'd be up and running. Okay, and you hear that a lot, and sometimes that does not turn out to be true. It actually turned out to be very true. So that was great. So during that same trip, I had been called a couple months before I officially took over the team from a company called Aperion. And they said, hey, we provide mobile application management and effectively like a corporate app store. Do you guys have a need for this? I said, we do, but I'm not really in a position to talk about anything right now, so I'll give you guys a call back in a couple months. And when we were setting up the trip to go see Red Hat, I happened to remember that Aperion also was in Boston. So I said, I'm just going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone with this. And I believe that was the winter of the snowpocalypse.
Yes, I think that's the technical term for it.
Yeah, so there was a blizzard 2 days before we got there. There was about 6 inches of snow in the middle of the week, and then I literally got out about 6 hours before the next blizzard hit. And I remember going downtown Boston to go to their office, and I climbed over a snowbank that was almost my height, and I'm a big dude, so... But it was worth it. It was good.
Yeah, it was
it
totally
paid
worth
off. So that was originally supposed to be like a 60, 90-minute meeting, which I think everybody, including me, expected to be probably pretty vanilla to what most of your customers are, which is we just want a corporate app store.
Right.
During that meeting, though, it turned into about a 5-hour meeting because a couple things came to light about capabilities that they had that really sort of put a light bulb on the whole situation. So,
Yeah, so I think Bill came in expecting the typical corporate app store pitch that we normally make. A lot of people equate mobile application management with a corporate app store, and that doesn't fully describe the set of features that we provide. And since there was such an outpouring of hands for who knows appearing, I want to do like the quick 90-second elevator pitch, just so you all know what it is that we do. So we're a leading provider of mobile application management. And what that means is we help enterprises secure, manage, and then distribute their applications out to their enterprise. And we pride ourselves on being able to manage any app and deliver it to any device. So managed devices, BYOD, in-house applications, public app store applications, third-party applications. We'll take it all and we'll put it onto any device that you need to get onto. So we started having this conversation about these additional functionality, the additional features that we had in the platform. And there were really two light bulb moments. The first was we started talking about our open APIs. So you can access any functionality in our platform, not just through the mobile application we put on a device or the administrative portal on the web, but you can programmatically access it through APIs. And what that meant for EA was that they could still control the user experience, which, as Bill mentioned, is really the main thrust of their mobile program, is a great user experience. And they wanted to control that. Great. You can call our APIs. You can still have access to our management and distribution capabilities. And then the second was we started talking about what we call our policy framework. What that means is you can take any app from any development team, upload it into our system, apply wrapping technology, and then add additional security or management or analytics functionality to that app. Doesn't require an SDK, doesn't require you to go to all your development teams and say, I need you to implement this standard functionality, and really distract from the main purpose of the app that they're trying to create, right? So it relieves some of the burden from the development team and helps with governance, security, management, analytics of these applications. So as Bill mentioned, we had them in for 60, 90 minutes. We were expecting to also kind of just do the standard pitch, turned into a 5-hour conversation. And I think after that meeting, the pieces sort of started to come together.
Took another month or two for it to fully come together. Yeah.
And then I'll hand it back over to Bill to kind of tell you what happened after that and where we're going.
So again, sort of time shifting a little bit back to when we knew that we had a couple of compelling apps and that both of these could be major ways to solve these problems. One question, which is not an unusual question, that we got from sort of multiple quarters of leadership and other groups and everything else, which was, why not build it? Okay. I'm going to thump my chest a little bit here. The 3 guys that I have on my team in 20-something years of working in tech, these are, bar none, the 3 best architects and engineers I've ever worked with. Okay, so could we build an MBAS? No offense. Yes, we could. Could we build an MAM? Yeah, sure. Take us a little while, figure out probably all the pain points you guys have already learned, but yeah, we could. Better question, though, is should we? Is that really what we're here to do? I'm here to build a mobile app program, not a mobile infrastructure program. Okay? So, and all these things have to be considered. And I think one of the biggest ones that you can use to sort of frame things with finance people and leadership and everybody else is when they look at, you know, the sticker price of a service, which, by the way, was very reasonable. It was a matter of, okay, you know, well, why are we going to, you know, write a check to do this? You're going to pay for it either way. You're either going to pay for it by writing a check and doing it outright, or you're going to pay our salaries to do this. And by the way, while we're building something you can buy, we're not doing the thing that you really want us to do, which is build apps. And then over time, there's all the care and feeding that go into those platforms. And because, again, referring back to how rapidly mobile is evolving, you're going to be doing that care and feeding every year, probably multiple times a year. Is that really what you want to be doing? So I knew that in going to get all this greenlit, one thing that was going to torpedo us is, as great as these two companies were and their solutions were, I knew that if we went up and did not do due diligence, they were going to say, so you've talked to one vendor each, and this is what you're going to do. We had to dig into this. So we did all of the usual suspects. So Forrester, Gartner, Google, read a whole bunch of white papers, blah, blah, blah. And we found that with MBAS vendors, there actually were quite a few. And what was interesting about them was they all took pretty wildly different approaches to things. I mean, they solved the same fundamental problem, but how they go about it was very, very different. So we found initially about 5. Now, on the MAM side, there was another interesting thing, which is we found that there's a whole bunch of companies that claim that they're an MAM. What they really are is an MDM. Okay, so mobile device management is all about locking down the devices. And I don't know, for all of you, how prevalent BYOD is inside your company, but people are generally not cool with the fact that, I bought my device, I pay for my device, but you're going to lock it down? It doesn't go over real great. So we, in starting very early with our security and risk management group through this whole process, from inception to design to everything else, one question that we asked them was, what is it you're really looking to do from a secure aspect? And that was locking down the applications and the data, being able to freeze people out if need be, and then revoke those applications and that data and access to them as we need at will. Other than that, nobody really cares about the device. Okay? So now, this was late May, early June, and for one of those applications that I mentioned, we had a November target that we had to deploy at. That is not a whole lot of time, effectively, to get the whole group together, get everybody spun up, get your infrastructure in place, do your designs, do your development, and then deploy. And by the way, since we're a new group, that includes setting up a QA process, a DevOps process, and everything else. That's a lot to do in about 5 months. So we had to put a lot of restrictions on how we were going to do this and make it as efficient and deep as possible. So we reduced the candidates on the MBAS and the MAM side to 2 apiece. We also said that we are going to time box the POCs to about 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and also we're going to overlap them, which means that as we're testing an MBAS, we're also evaluating an MAM at the same time at an API level. The other thing, and this proved, I think, one of the most pivotal decisions that we made, we didn't do the contrived hello world on steroids type application. We used the real application use case. So the questions that we were going to ask, the problems that we were going to fall into were all real. They were things that we were going to encounter. We also decided to kill a couple birds with one stone in that we used this time to prove out our architecture. So how are we going to structure our services? How are we going to make sure that they were reliable? What did our data payloads look like, and how did they actually interact with the front end? We cheated a little bit, and we also sort of used you guys as free consulting during that time of, well, what do you guys think about that? So at the same time that we were doing it, all 4 vendors were really looking at our use cases, and were able to identify areas of their systems that, yeah, we can totally do this. We can't do this yet, but we can talk about getting it on a roadmap, which was pivotal for us to align our development timelines and roadmaps with what the platforms were capable of. There was no surprises when actually rubber met the road about the production phase. So then we started the evaluation, the Battle Royale, or POC-O-Palooza. The couple of things I'll point out was, one, of course, any product or framework or technology you can adapt to, but can it adapt to you? And that was really important to us because we were on this hugely compressed timeline, and we did not have a whole lot of time to learn some really proprietary way of doing things. So could we adapt to it? And we had the advantage of my guys were super strong with Node. So great. How secure is the platform? Both inherently, so the security of the platform itself, but are there features in the platforms that help our solutions, what we code, to be secure? So does it help us? Or do we have to wind up sort of putting Band-Aids around everything to make secure? How good is support? This is a huge one. All 4 vendors, we dealt with their support groups. When we had a problem, we didn't send it to the POC team, we sent it through their support organizations to get the feedback so we could sort of gauge how they reacted. And yes, it's not a completely perfect situation because everybody can be on their best behavior during a POC. Elliot is always on his best behavior during a pre-sale situation. So, but it was still a mostly real-world evaluation of what was going on. And then, was it difficult to spin up? How good were the development resources? So again, how quickly, considering that we only had 2 to 3 weeks to do this, how quickly could we get our head around this thing? So, adoption and buy-in, when we went in front of the committees to basically say, this is what we want to do. I'm not going to go into all of these, but this is just sort of a takeaway. We documented the hell out of everything that we found. When we did our score, we did the scoreboard, when you saw what the votes were and which way that we swung and why. But we also did like high-level slide presentations for executive level because most executives don't really want to read a 50-page report on how your POC went. So, but we also talked very in-depth about the applications, why they had an ROI, why they were impactful to the company, what they were going to accomplish, and then bringing in this investment in infrastructure, how is it going to enable us to do that better? So, and then also, I do want to point out, like I mentioned, security. We had the SRM group inside of EA involved from the very, very beginning, straight through a review of the POCs, a review of our architecture designs, and then a review of our implementations. So we knew beginning to end, the security groups were happy with what we were doing. And then you do have to think about, from a program management point of view, what is the financial run rates and everything that you're going to have, and how does that all balance out, which a lot of times sort of gets left out when you're focusing on the tech. So we had winners. Clearly, I think you can guess who won. Otherwise, this is a really awkward talk. So why Feed Henry? And for us, like I mentioned, they were Node. Great. They were also Node that had a lot of really solid developer tool sets to them, but it wasn't like developer tools that also had Node. It was the other way around. And for us, that worked really well because we could actually evolve the platform ourselves. And rather than just sort of waiting for new features to come out, we can just say, well, we'll build services to actually do this function that they don't do at all or don't do yet or whatever. It gave us options that were really important. You guys were awesome during the POC. Both of you guys were.
So were you.
Thank you. Here's your $5. So, and also, like I mentioned, the mobile build farm, none of the other MBASs had that. That was a feature that was entirely unique to Feed Henry. And was just something that we could sort of check off the list of, great, I don't have to worry about that one. So, Aperion. Why did Aperion win? For us, it was when we really looked at the API sets, even though I think that no customer had used APIs to the level that we do.
Yeah, not to the same level. And I think it was, it was the ability to be extensible, right? So we didn't subscribe or prescribe a monolithic workflow to EA or any other customer. We want to make it extensible. We want to make it flexible. Use the functionality that makes sense in kind of the workflows that make sense, along with the systems that you have or the systems that you're building. And also, we've been doing this for a number of years. We have a pretty robust platform. As Bill was mentioning, if you build it yourself, you got to go through all the pain points that we've already gone through and we have already learned from.
We also, because we all worked so closely, because as I mentioned, we overlapped these POCs, we had another thing that just sort of bore fruit unexpectedly, which was Red Hat and Aperion actually teamed up to build some features into Feed Henry that integrated automatically with Aperion.
Yeah, and it's great. It's one of those things where Bill mentioned earlier, we didn't run this like a POC, we ran this like a partnership. Mm-hmm. So they got the proof of the technology, they got the technology they wanted, but we also got integration with Aperion, so now we have mobile application management within the platform with a great vendor and partner.
Yep.
So, so we had our winners. I think we selected in early August, and then we started our production phase at the very beginning of September. So we had a couple weeks of design, and we actually were able to do all of this very reliably And we wound up deploying a week early than the target, which for a lot of IT groups, and a lot of IT groups, I'll be delicate when I say that, that does not always happen. So this was a very good sign that our first project out of the gate with a brand new group, with a brand new infrastructure, everything else, we actually came in early, completely on budget. Everyone was really, really happy with us, so this was great. So where are we today? So in the last year, we produced 4 apps. 2 of them are actually in the midst of going through major revisions right now that we're going to produce later this summer. So one of those applications were started on Ionic 1. We're actually in the process of moving to Ionic 2 before Ionic 2 is actually even released yet. And we've been very, very happy with what we've seen. 23 services. Not all of these services are actually in Feed Henry. However, almost all of them started in Feed Henry. So the reason I bring this up is there are always going to be certain functions that an MBAS is not really suited for, a lot of heavy lifting of data and things like that. And so we've started these services in Feed Henry, and then because they were Node, with very, very little remediation, we moved them over to AWS. Okay, and that's because the proprietary hooks that Feed Henry puts into the code are extremely minimal. So pulling those out and basically refactoring to work in AWS or Azure or things like that is really simple to do. So that was great. And in fact, we are actually working right now on a data federation framework written entirely in Node.js. Nothing like this really fully exists. There's 2 projects that we're aware of out there that kind of do this, but we were not thrilled with what we saw. So Mr. Carstens down there just said he's going to go build a new one. So if this thing pans out like we are hoping it will, we are thinking about at some point maybe taking that framework open source. So kind of interesting. We're going to expand the apps that we have. We're hoping to be able to take on about 2 to 3 new apps per year in addition to what we have. I've done this with my team, which is these 3 guys. Okay, and we do now have a couple sustaining guys in India, but this is it. So we accomplished all this with a very, very small, very experienced pro team. So it is very possible to do. We would not have been able to do that if we had to worry about all the infrastructure and everything else. So that's a huge takeaway on this. And also, by the way, I'm hiring. So if anybody knows hybrid mobile architects and engineers or Node.js service architects, look me up. And then we do have a longer-term goal of hoping that other EA teams are able to actually adopt these platforms so that we're not the bottleneck. So summary, user experience matters at every level of your program. So do not discount that, otherwise you are probably not going to be very successful. Your mobile apps have to be compelling, they have to be intuitive. Do you want to be in which business? Building infrastructure or building apps? It is no joke with both of these companies and their products. We were up and running in a matter of days. There was not weeks of provisioning and figuring stuff out. And yes, we did take up some of that effort during the POC, so that was actually another way of sort of killing multiple birds with a single stone. Feed Henry, you've heard me glow about Feed Henry, why it's been great, and Aperion as well. The combination of both platforms, both from what they've done and what we were able to do. Has everyone seen the documentary on Netflix, or not Netflix, on YouTube and Vimeo of Everything is a Remix? Okay, look it up. It's actually a very interesting documentary. Everything is a remix with functionality too. We were able to use a lot of functionality from Aperion that actually did not entirely have to do with distributing apps. We were just able to take demographic data, analytic data, and wind up recomposing that into other functions. So if you think about things not just being turnkey, but using them on a services level, there's all kinds of stuff that you can do. So there's another talk coming up.
Yep, we have another talk tomorrow, I believe. Yep, tomorrow with Josh Waldman, who's down front here, about building mobile centers of excellence. So EA has done a great job based on past successes and failures. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a lot of that happen to a lot of people. We want to minimize those failures up front so you're successful. So the learnings we get from EA and other customers, we want to share those with you guys. So more than welcome to attend.
So, and that's it. So, questions?
Questions, yeah. Not everyone at once.
Mm-hmm. We're about 8,500 full-time employees worldwide, and then contractors and everything, probably, I don't know, 13,000, something like that worldwide, and some of those are seasonal. So yeah, that's what it is, and we're in 17 different countries. And another thing to actually sort of note about our particular environment is those studios are largely autonomous. So this is a very heterogeneous environment. So taking all of that into account is a huge challenge, but we make it part of how we design.
For using a real use case for the POC,
Mm-hmm.
how did you determine which items to scope down to make sure that it accurately reflected?
Well, that was actually fairly easy because a big part of it was we knew that we were going to have to take the MAM and service enable it and put that. So I think that was probably the biggest area that we focused on use cases was not just use cases using the MBAS, but use cases that on trying to bring the MAM through the MBAS, and then how did we do that? Because all the regular content management stuff, things like that, we're going to handle that. We know what we're going to do there. But this was sort of like an unknown that we really had to put the MAMs through the paces as far as like how composable are they really. So that sort of made it easy to kind of figure out where we wanted to focus.
Another thing that we focused on is, Appear has a great API that we actually focus into our services. One of the biggest thing is how to ship those that has been asked. Can we provision only certain users that could access an API on the user can have? Would they get all of their applications for different devices? Or if they're logging in at this iPad, they shouldn't get Android. So we were testing the whole thing to make sure that their platform will support all users and minimal users. So we have an MVP, like a minimum viable product, listing stack, and then determine from that we really need it. We need to test it out. If it doesn't work, we don't have a viable product.
Mm-hmm.
We can't go with that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we selected it. It's very minimal.
Anybody else?
Have you done an MDM solution as well, and how are you merging that in with your MDM solution?
We have. We have not. We've partially rolled it out corporately, but we've rolled it out fully for these use cases. So it is fully integrated at that level. Very specific sort of skills or feature sets as far as what it's supposed to be doing. But it has been in full production with us since November.
And we have a lot of experience working with customers that use both MDM and MAM in our product specifically. And there's a good, they can mesh very well because Bill was mentioning the structure of EA, many different game studios, contractors. You can't always manage every device for every employee. So what customers of ours often do is they do have MDM. It serves a purpose. It manages devices. But there's also a security level that they put around their applications, and that's able to hit the rest of the extended enterprise, so the contractors, your distributors, whatever structure you have in your company, we can reach.
Was that the question? Or?
Yes, I was curious, what can you tell me what you're using?
Oh, so for MDM? No, actually, MDM did not pan out very well for us. So we are actually not doing that. I'm sorry, I misunderstood your question. We don't. It
EA just doesn't do that. You just focus on securing your app.
That's correct.
And that's it.
That's correct. Yep. Yeah, but I mean, as Caleb said, like Aperion allows you to do that. It's just for us, it was not a great cultural fit. So when we did all of the work with the SRM group, like I said, what it really came down to was if we put an app there, we put data there. That's what we want to protect and restrict and revoke. As long as we can do that, they don't really care like what else is the deal with your device, because we do have the ability to nuke the devices because of Office 365. So if you did have to sort of use the nuclear option on it, you can do that. So somebody lost it, it got stolen, great, we can take care of that. But other than that, we don't really have a big need to lock down all the devices. We just want to lock down our data and our apps. So, anybody else?
You talk about how easy it was to get started because there are cloud-based platforms and
Mm-hmm.
got up and running really quick. But can you talk about the experience of working on platforms that are on the cloud that can be updated with new features all the time?
It's been very, very low overhead for us. I mean, it's a black box in the best possible way. Okay, we don't care about images and provisioning and all this other stuff. We deploy our services. We have our environment set up. The Feed Henry environment is very, very scriptable. Okay, so we can trigger things off from other applications. We can trigger things off from things like Jenkins, and now we're starting to look at things like Ansible and everything else. So works very, very well in that frame. And it got us up and running super quickly. And I know from past experience when you do have to worry about actual servers, but even when you have to worry about VMs, especially when you're dealing with a small team, that can become such an enormous time sink for you that it is really super counterproductive. So just the fact that we don't really worry about it. And also, Feed Henry plays extremely well with other cloud systems. So Aperian's a cloud system, so we don't have to worry about that. So that works great. But I mentioned, the work that we're doing on AWS. In a case where we have either created a service that runs in AWS or migrated one from Feed Henry to AWS, the MBAS service or the microservice within Feed Henry just becomes a connector over to AWS. So it allows us to build these composite cloud services that work great. And very, very seamlessly. So it's been super easy. So anybody else? Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.